all these blogging conversations emerged. People were critiquing it, talking about how it was unfair if I was not a woman, they wouldn't be doing this, what was going on and whatnot. But no one asked me what it was like. So I sat and I blogged, and I wrote in gory detail what it was like to be up on that stage and what it felt like, what it meant to be a human, to be a public individual, and to not be recognized for my humanity. And it was one of the most surprising moments of my life, the feedback, the conversation shift, and the power of being that kind of public. And I realized that there's beauty and pain in being in public, something that we struggle with whenever we blog. And it's learning that, learning how to be in public, learning how to be public, learning how to be a public figure is one of the biggest challenges that I've had over all this time of blogging. Social media, their struggle with it, what it means to be a part of public life, and their tension between wanting to be in public and the fact that they often don't want to be public. But the technology forces them to be public whenever they want to be in public, and it's a constant struggle for them. Because what they want is they want voice and they want agency. They want to feel like they're somebody and they want to be recognized. And for 30 years, we have systematically removed young people's access to other public life, and they have refound it online, and we try to control that in critical ways. It's always really interesting when we think about a blogging community because we take the opportunity to speak in public for granted, but yet we have systematically undermined the ways in which young people can be a part of that public life. And so I've spent a lot of time learning and talking to them, trying to figure out how they navigate different aspects of this. And what I realized is that, it's hard to figure out how to do this. It's hard to figure out how to be, navigating these worlds. It's not that young people want to give up on privacy. That's an often misunderstood aspect of this. They want to be a part of public life, and we haven't given them a way to understand privacy in that public life. And so they try to reclaim it. And that reclaiming is so powerful because they're looking for their voice. They're growing up in a digital world which they take for granted, but they're trying to figure out who they are in light of it. A lot from young people, a whole lot. I've learned about what it means to be in public. I've learned to really appreciate the different approaches they take. In fact, I've adopted many of their tactics. I've learned to encode my content, to layer the different meanings so that some people understand what I'm talking about and other people don't. It's my way of reclaiming control in an environment where it's often taken away from me. I've learned to appear open, even as I keep some things to myself, as a way of actually figuring out what matters to me at a core. I've learned how to use different tools to be a part of different communities and navigate that, but I'm always struggling with it. And I have to say, the internet has changed a lot since I was a teenager myself, since I was using these services. It used to be that those who were online were self-identified geeks, freaks, and queers. I was all three, I loved it. But for many young people today, that's not their story. Technology has become mainstream, and with it has become a whole set of mainstream concerns that we don't necessarily know how to navigate, and those who are most marginalized don't necessarily get to have their voices heard in the way that we took for granted when this all began.
All mean very different things. So, for example, if you or I had been in, I don't know, Holborn yesterday when there was a big fire underground and everybody had to flee, you can bet your life on YouTube now there are probably hundreds, thousands of pictures of this incident and videos, short films of this incident. Now, some people would say that makes those people citizen journalists, but to me they're not. They're just witnesses who film something and then they send in their footage to either upload it onto YouTube or they send it to somewhere like the BBC. All the media organisations ask these days, don't they, in news stories, did you witness this? Are you affected by this? If you are, contact us. And they ask for things like footage. Now, that's what most people, in the broadest sense of citizen journalists, that's what they do. They just send in things. But then a real journalist makes the story. That's what they do. They just send in things. But then a real journalist makes the story. So in that sense, most, I think, of what people talk about citizen journalism doesn't threaten professional journalists at all. Because most journalism is still done by real journalists. They use material which members of the public send in. This is a very, very new thing. So you don't have, people exaggerate, I think, the effects of the internet. You don't have a journalist on every corner. You have us with cameras on every corner. Every incident now is going to be witnessed by somebody or other. Certain types of journalism, say for example, review journalism. Yeah, say cultural journalism, where people do reviews of shows or plays or of restaurants or whatever. There, complete amateurs can set themselves up and have been doing as critics. And they have encroached upon professional critics' work. So some people have made themselves quite famous as theatre critics or as food critics or something, who don't have a background in journalism. And so some of those kind of people have been threatened by citizen journalists. But I don't think most journalism has been threatened by citizen journalists. I think the threats to journalism come from elsewhere. They come from again, like I showed you that clip from Storyful, that agency in Dublin. That's what they do, is they verify stuff that is sent in from the internet, that it is what it says it is. The BBC, as soon as material from the public was, as soon as the camera phones were good enough that they could use, they set up a unit to do the same thing, to verify stuff. So they have a what do they call it? User-generated content. They don't call it citizen journalism. They call what they get from the public user-generated content, and they have a unit. I think they have 2 units now that verify user-generated content. So again, they see it as a resource, a free resource, because they don't pay mostly. I mean, sometimes they would pay, but they don't pay.
We have to draw a distinction here between blog hosting platforms on the one hand, then blogs operating on these platforms, and software that can be software code that can be used for implementing blogs. So let's start with the first, blog hosting platforms where you can run and operate a blog. 3 of the most well-known commercial services are Blogspot, that is owned by Google, Tumblr, that is owned by Yahoo, and WordPress, that is owned by a company called Automatic. So Blogspot and Tumblr have quite comparable capital accumulation models. They are predominantly based on targeted advertising, although there are also additional services. So, for example, Blogger sells special domain names for blogs, but the largest share of revenues is generated by Tumblr and Blogger by selling targeted advertising. So what kind of labor do we find, digital labor do we find in targeted advertising? The commodity that is sold here are not the platforms. You don't pay for the access of creating a blog on Blogger or Tumblr. It's a service without an access fee. So the platform itself is not the commodity. However, users create a lot of data, metadata, data that they upload, information about their contents, other websites that they visit, and so on. So a lot of data and metadata, and this production of this data is a form of unremunerated digital labor that creates a data commodity that these blog hosting platforms, Google and Yahoo, then sell to advertising clients who pay some money and in return present targeted advertisements to the users of these blogs. So the labor, the digital labor we are talking about in these platforms is the unremunerated labor of users and bloggers creating value and data that is sold as a commodity. WordPress has a bit more a complex model. We must also distinguish that there are two forms of WordPress. There's WordPress.com and there's WordPress.org. So let's first have a look at WordPress.com. It's a commercial platform comparable to Blogger and Tumblr, operated by the company Automattic, that is a for-profit company. It's a blog hosting platform that has two different models that it combines in its capital accumulation model. On the one hand, like Tumblr and Blogger, it uses targeted advertising, where we are talking about user labor that creates data and metadata that is sold as a commodity. On the other hand, it also sells services, web hosting, cloud storage, and also premium services to clients, also partly very large companies like CNN and Time and other large companies are such customers and clients of Automattic. And for this part, the paid employees working for Automattic should be considered as digital workers creating value of these services that is then sold to clients. So it's a combination of two different capital accumulation strategies. WordPress.org is run by a charity that does not have a for-profit imperative, the WordPress Foundation, that is funded by donations, and it's a free software project. So the code of WordPress, the software code, you can download it and you can implement your own blog by it. So WordPress.org does not have a for-profit imperative, and a lot of volunteers contribute to the writing of this code. So the WordPress software code is a free software project, and it's a commons-based project. Given that it's not sold as a commodity, but it is given without payment to people as a common, we cannot speak of digital labor that is involved here. And the fact that WordPress is also a free software project, WordPress.org, hints at the third dimension that I was mentioning at the start of this input, namely that there are also blog projects that operate as free software platforms. So WordPress.org is one, Drupal is another one. Drupal is run by the Drupal Association, that is a non-profit association. And in these cases, these are volunteer projects where coders voluntarily contribute work time. However, there's no commodity form involved here, so we cannot speak of digital labor and the exploitation of digital labor. Another dimension, but all of this, the software projects and the blog hosting platforms, they are a kind of infrastructure of blogs. Based on this, bloggers operate their own blogs, and we must say that the vast majority of blogs are amateur projects run by hobbyists for hobby and leisure time purposes, run by fans, run for non-commercial purposes, run as alternative media. So I would say that's the vast majority of blogs in the world. Of course, there are also some that have a for-profit imperative, and then there are some that started as non-commercial projects, as alternative online media, and were then commodified. And the most well-known example is the Huffington Post. So the Huffington Post started as an alternative news blog where a lot of journalists thought it's a good project and because it had did not have a for-profit imperative, they volunteered and without payment or the incentive without payment contributed articles that they wrote. However, in 2011, the Huffington Post was sold to AOL, so one large multimedia company, for more than 300 million US dollars. And a lot of the writers who contributed articles as volunteers were very disappointed by it and felt that suddenly their work was turned into digital labor and was exploited for profit purposes. And of course, the Huffington Post then introduced a commercial strategy based on advertising, and some of these writers, including the writer Jonathan Tassini, filed a lawsuit against AOL and the Huffington Post and demanded that they get some payment for the articles that they contributed. The court ruled that they should not get any payment, so that's the legal opinion. But of course, it's that's a legal opinion. But of course, it's a political and also moral issue. And my opinion is that these, given that the Huffington Post turned into a commercial project, my opinion is that we have to take into account that suddenly these articles had economic value and contributed to the for-profit imperatives of the Huffington Post that turned into a capitalist company. So clearly, this writing these articles then turned into into a form of digital labor, into a form of exploitation within class relations. And so I think it's reasonable to assume that these workers as journalists should be paid for their work. They demanded that they get 100 million US dollars, all of them together. The economic value when AOL bought the platform was over 300 million US dollars. So even if they would get these 100 million dollars is a wage sum, then still there would be exploitation. However, the degree of exploitation would be lower because it makes a difference if you're completely unpaid or if you get a certain payment. And it shows us just the example, the problems that are involved in for-profit projects. So wherever there is a commodity form involved that is sold for profit purposes in order to accumulate capital, there are forms of labor involved, and there are forms of exploitation involved.
There is mutual assistance in a sense that traditional media is assisted by new media in China, and it's really a case of new media or digitized social media being a lot faster than getting like the usual a camera, mic set, and then to broadcast live, unless the event happened exactly where you were. Although the traditional media, being mostly government controlled, is it's I'd say a little bit scared of new media, because new media has the capability to move much faster, especially social media like blogs and microblogs like Twitter and Weibo. To some reason, they do have cause to be a little bit afraid, because it's just simply a case of the current situation of China, where there is still a lot of government control. The other issue is whether or not there is a requirement to, especially for breaking news or for key events, to restrict yourself to one source or not, as more often than not for key events, the usual norm would be to cite Xinhua. So when you limit how many sources you can use for breaking news stories or for general news stories, that in itself compromises the use of social media. That basically makes social media fade out of the whole arena as a whole. Social media doesn't really, it doesn't really diminish or weaken traditional media. It gives traditional media a set of new wings, if we must put it this way. In my case, my example is always the People's Daily. When you think about the People's Daily, most of us think it's an official newspaper of the Communist Party. It's interested in propaganda, government announcements, and political theory. Which is certainly the case for the printed version. Now on Weibo, they've changed a little bit. On WeChat, they sometimes sprinkle self-help articles along with all the usual political propaganda. And they know obviously that their audience on WeChat is a lot younger, and they might not be so much versed into, say for example, Marxist theory or other political doctrines, and they're more interested in getting more out of their lives. So they sprinkle it with you can be better, this is how to succeed, things like that, making themselves more relevant to a much younger audience, which attracts more audiences. And the way they've done it on WeChat and Weibo is they've used a new form, they've used infographics. The new government under Xi Jinping and Li Keqiang have increasingly used infographics to make sense of what used to be just simply thousands upon thousands of Chinese characters of official speak, which simply did not make sense to anyone who was not inside the Zhongnanhai apparatus. And so by making their message more relevant, they are gaining more viewers, more readers, and they are, in doing so, not making themselves irrelevant in the digital era. The value of those citizen journalists is that they're faster, and, well, obviously, simply being faster is the reason already. Like I said, you don't need to set up the usual, camera, mic set on a TV studio. If, obviously if a fire broke next door, there simply wouldn't be enough time. It's much easier capturing it on a smartphone and tweeting about it when news breaks. So they're very fast, and that's a benefit on its own. What else can be provided by those citizen journalists? Well, the next step would be interviews done by those citizen journalists. But this would only be possible if a citizen journalist was actually well known. And that on itself is a bit of a riddle in China. That's something that could happen, but at the moment, I personally don't see it happening that soon.
My tea's gone cold.